All right, Nahum. Nahum. What do you know about Nahum?
Right before Habakkuk.
Yeah. I just asked someone recently, what do you know about Nahum? And they were like, it's a prophet. It's before Habakkuk. And, I don't know if you know this or not. If you've had In-N-Out Burger, they're making it further and further east. I think they're working on one in Tennessee, but mostly a California burger place. But In-N-Out Burger has these. They put Bible verses on their cups, or like burger wrapping in kind of inconspicuous places. And so on their double, which is 2 patties and 2 cheese burger, on the wrapper around it, hidden away is Nahum 1:7. It just says Nahum 1:7, so you got to go look it up. And they have one underneath the cup. If you look underneath the cups, on the Coke cup or the milkshake cup, they have different verses other than that. But that's the one on the double. So if you're in California, you know about Nahum 1:7. But that may be the only thing you know about Nahum, because not a lot of people know about Nahum.
I thought it was In-N-Out here now.
That would be amazing.
Yeah,
Is it not? What is the...
maybe you saw it in San Antonio. Probably there.
They are in San Antonio.
Maybe
Yeah.
that's where I've seen them at.
Yeah.
They're in Oregon now as well.
Yeah, they have them in Oregon. Yeah, so basically West Coast, and then moving over a little bit further east. So what is Nahum about? It is really the sequel to Jonah. In seminary, we were taught to remember Nahum as Jonah's wish. Jonah's wish. What was Jonah's wish? What did he hope for?
Wrath.
Yeah, the destruction of Nineveh, of the Ninevites. And
I'm not trying to block you out. I left my glasses at home. I got bifocals in the bottom of my sunglasses, so I got to wear my sunglasses.
he's about to fall asleep. He's just covering,
Yeah, cover my eyes up, yeah.
That's right.
You can't see my eyes now.
I'm trying to be interesting here. I'm trying to be engaged, Jonah's wish, because Jonah wanted Nineveh to be destroyed. That's what he hoped for. And 100 years later, it is destroyed. And that's what Nahum talks about. It's the prediction before it happens of Nineveh, the Assyrian capital's destruction. And that's what he wanted. It's a warning to not presume upon God's grace. I think if you take Jonah and Nahum together, you could take Charles Dickens' title, A Tale of Two Cities, except it's the same city. It's Nineveh Part 1, Nineveh Part 2. It's 2 different generations that live in the same city. The generation of Jonah that repents, and it's massive revival. About 100 years later, you have a different generation inhabiting the same city, and they're totally different, and they've fallen back into their wickedness, and God destroys them in a decisive way. One generation is saved, another generation is destroyed. And if we go back to Jonah for just a moment, Jonah chapter 4, verse 2, you remember what Jonah said in exasperation. Jonah 4:2, and he prayed to Yahweh and said, O Yahweh, was not this my word to myself while I was still in my own land? Therefore I went ahead to flee to Tarshish, for I knew that you are a gracious and compassionate God, slow to anger and abundant in loving kindness, and one who relents concerning evil. And what he's quoting from is Exodus chapter 34. Exodus 34, which is a key text on the character of God. Exodus 34, verse 6. Then Yahweh passed by in front of him, that's Moses, and called out, Yahweh, Yahweh, God, compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in loving kindness and truth, who keeps loving kindness for thousands, who forgives iniquity, transgression, and sin. That's the book of Jonah right there. And then he continues, and yet he will by no means leave the guilty unpunished. visiting the iniquity of fathers on the children and on the grandchildren to third and fourth generation. So that's Nahum right there. So God is merciful and also wrathful. And you see both of those in that statement there. And Jonah focuses on that one, Nahum on the second one. Jonah, picture of God's mercy. Nahum, picture of God's justice. So one repented, one city repented, and one was ruined. Like I said, it's about 100 years after Jonah. We got to get some context. Northern kingdom, the 10 tribes in the north, are taken away and resettled by Assyria in 722 BC. A little bit later, Judah in the south is attacked and is protected in 2 Kings 19 when the angel of Yahweh comes and wipes out a bunch of Assyrians, and they have to retreat back. So they almost take Jerusalem. They take a bunch of surrounding places near there, but they're pushed back by the angel of Yahweh. So they don't take the southern kingdom. They don't take Judah and Jerusalem. The city of Nineveh at this time is ruled by a man named Ashurbanipal. It's a monumental city. It's an impenetrable city. It's a historic city founded by Nimrod in Genesis 10, I think, mentions that. It's got these massive, double thick, 100-foot high walls, and it just would seem so unlikely that this city would be destroyed for all that it was. And yet, Nahum predicts its destruction in his book. And it would happen in the year 612 BC. That's an agreed upon date of the destruction of Nineveh, 612 BC. Now, dating the book is important because this is prophetic. He's not like after the fact going like, oh yeah, this is what happened. He's predicting this ahead of time. And what's interesting, to help us date the book better, we have another historical event that Nahum mentions in chapter 3 that helps us to locate when this book is written. In chapter 3, verses 8 and 9, Nahum references the city of Nahum, which is the city of Thebes in Egypt, which is modern-day Luxor. And that city was destroyed in 663 BC. And guess who destroyed it? The Assyrians. So their capital is Nineveh, the Assyrians. They destroyed in 663 this Egyptian great city of Thebes, Nahum, and that city seemed impenetrable. That city seemed to be untakeable. And it had a lot of other similarities to Nineveh. And so Nahum is going to reference that city and be like, hey guys, remember Nahum? Remember how that was destroyed? Oh yeah, I bet you remember, because you're the ones that did it. And God is going to do the same to you, Assyria. And so basically, he's using them as an illustration. But that helps us to date the book, because we know that this city was destroyed in 663. It was partially rebuilt in 654 BC. And then, of course, we already gave our date for when Nineveh is destroyed in 612 BC. So Nahum then likely writes sometime between 663 and 654 BC, or maybe close to 650 even. So he's writing around 40 to 50 years before the destruction of Nineveh. And so he's predicting their destruction in a very specific way, many decades before it takes place. As far as Israel is going, King Manasseh is reigning at this time. He's the king there. So that's what we have. It's an incredible prophecy. It's what we call a near prophecy. It's a prophecy that was predicted, and it already has taken place from our perspective, and even from the time of the New Testament, that this was an already fulfilled thing. So, and that's really significant because it's going to play into some of the purpose of the book. So let's look at Nahum 1:1.
Are you reading ESV?
LSB. I've got the LSB. Yeah.
Okay, in the ESV, when you made a reference to chapter 3:8,
Yeah.
there's actually in ESV it's called Thebes.
Yep.
There's
Thebes. Yep.
There's it says in Hebrew Hammon.
Yeah. Nahum.
No,
And same thing, yeah, same city, Thebes. Yep. And then today, Luxor, it's part of that region. So, yeah, some cities say the same name for a long time. Some cities get a bunch of different names.
Yeah,
So.
I struggled to find Nahum when you were.
Yeah, you're like, where is that? He's making this thing up. Yeah, I'm glad you checked. Good Berean. All right, Nahum 1:1. The oracle of Nineveh, the book of the vision of Nahum the Elkoshite. So, very, very simple. This is really all we know about Nahum, by the way. Okay, so we learn a few things here. It's about Nineveh, okay? We see Nahum, and we'll talk about him in just a minute, and he's the Elkoshite, so this is probably a reference to where he's from. We're not really certain where that city's located. There's a few options. One is a city in northern Iraq. One is the city of Capernaum. You can hear Nahum maybe in there, Capernaum, the village of Nahum. That's possible. Or it might be somewhere located in Judah. But that's really, we're not certain at this point. Maybe further archaeological discoveries will help us in the future. But that's not so important. Nahum's name, though, is important. And this is going to help you remember what this book is about. So if you remember nothing else, remember what Nahum's name means. It means comfort. Comfort. That's what Nahum's name means. And we want to make a connection now to another book that uses this name, and it's Isaiah. Isaiah in the turning point. Remember, Isaiah is broken into two parts, really, 1 to 39 and 40 to 66. And at the hinge point, when in that second half of the book, where he's telling them about their future hope and their future salvation after this time of judgment and wrath, chapter 40, verse 1 says, "Comfort, O comfort my people. Comfort, O comfort my people, says your God." And it's that word, Nahum. So at the turning point, he's encouraging them of their future salvation. And of course, much of what Isaiah talks about looks further into the eschatological future of the kingdom of the Messiah and the millennium. But Nahum is a comfort for God's people in the present time with one of their big enemies, Assyria. So that is significant. Nahum is about comfort. And so we might say comfort in judgment. If you want to remember Nahum, comfort in judgment is what Nahum is about. It's the judgment of Nineveh, but it's a comfort for Israel because they are one of their great enemies. It's the comfort that God will destroy the bad guys, right? The comfort in judgment that God destroys the enemies. And here's maybe, if you wanted one verse for the whole book that helps encapsulate that, it's chapter 1, verse 15. Chapter 1, verse 15. It says, "Behold, on the mountains, the feet of him who proclaims good news, who announces peace. Celebrate your feasts, O Judah, pay your vows, for never again will the vile one pass through you. He is cut off completely." And so there's good news. The good news is in context about Assyria's destruction, Nineveh's destruction, and that is good news for Israel because they were an oppressor to Israel. And so they've been cut off, and now they can worship God because of the destruction of their enemy. So that's a key verse. But here's where it gets really fun, really significant, and really comforting for Israel in the long term, and for us. Because that terminology in 1:15, "Behold the feet," maybe you know that verse. Maybe that sounds familiar to you. It's used in the New Testament. Paul used it in Romans 10 about the gospel, the good news of the gospel coming to people. But it's actually used before that. It's used before Nahum wrote in the book of Isaiah. Isaiah talks about this, and he says, "Beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news." But Isaiah is not talking about Assyria's destruction, the city of Nineveh. He's talking about the future eschatological day when God's people, Israel, are delivered from their enemies after the Battle of Armageddon. And so what Nahum does is he uses the language of Isaiah, which he already knows about, but Isaiah's talking about the far future, and he uses that same language to talk about the comfort God's people receive in a more near fulfillment, in a near deliverance from their enemies. God destroys Nineveh, one of their great enemies, and that's a great comfort to them. But he says it in the language of when God will ultimately destroy all of their enemies in the future. And so the purpose then, theologically, for Nahum is, as one person said, his is the near fulfillment, that guarantees the far fulfillment. In other words, the logic of Nahum is, hey, you guys know about Isaiah? You know what he said about the far future? I'm going to use that same language and say, look at how God does it in this small way here with one of your enemies. If he can predict the future destruction of Nineveh and carry it out precisely, and that's a comfort to you, then he will absolutely fulfill all the promises he made to you in Isaiah. And historically, 612 BC, what Nahum predicts comes to pass. Nineveh is destroyed. A couple years later, 605 BC, is the first deportation of Judah in the south to Babylon. So Babylon is one of the main actor, along with some others, who destroys Nineveh. And so then a few years later, they take and exile the southern kingdom. So that's not really encouraging, right? That's like very discouraging. However, they have this prophecy in Nahum that says to them, and Isaiah is the one also who says, hey, Israel, look to your future hope. God is going to bring you out of this Babylonian captivity. That's what that first section of Isaiah 40 to 48 is about, bringing them out of exile. So you've got all these things going on here. Nahum is connected to Isaiah because of comfort, that hinge point. He's also connecting intentionally to the language of Isaiah and the future day when all of their enemies are destroyed. But he's doing it in a way that's something more close and near to them that's going to happen right before they're taken into Babylonian exile. So there's like all these things going on, and he's like, this is your comfort. God did it here. He'll do it again. So as you go into this difficult time, bad circumstance, you can have comfort in the midst of judgment that God is going to bring all of his promises to pass. So this is a powerful book of prophecy and of comfort for God's people that all of his promises will come to pass. All right, did that make sense? Okay, cool. I love this book. I mean, it's a sleeper. You know, it's one of those books where like, I don't know anything about Nahum. I haven't read Nahum recently. And then you start reading it and you get what he's trying to do. And you're like, this book is amazing. How have I not spent more time here? So, like I said, this is such an unlikely scenario to happen that that Nineveh, this great city, would be destroyed. It would really be absurd. One commentary says this, quote, one commentator, similarly, for those in the 7th century BC, the idea that Assyria, one of the most powerful empires in world history, would be brought to its knees was also laughable. Its capital city, Nineveh, boasted an inner wall that measured 8 miles in circumference, 100 feet tall, and wide enough for 3 side-by-side chariots, containing 1,200 towers and 14 gates. The king's palace was made of the finest cedar, cypress, and alabaster that money could buy, with a great hall that measured 40 by 150 feet. His fighting force was unparalleled, as indicated by a 46-acre armory that took 6 years to build. And so they are, this would be like saying, like, okay, in about 50 years, New York, Manhattan will be leveled. It will be gone. You know, we're like, yeah, right, come on. Nineveh is just this superpower city. And yet in 612, Nabopolassar, king of Babylon, the father of Nebuchadnezzar, is going to come in and decimate the city. Now, what's interesting about the prophecy is within this, he talks about how the city is going to be destroyed by flood, but also by fire. And you're like, wait a minute, those seem to like cancel each other out. You know, fire plus flood equals, you know, you're all good. but there's references to fire and flood in the city. And actually, that is historically how the city was destroyed. There's 3 rivers that are associated with the city of Nineveh. And that was a huge strength. I mean, the one thing, the absolute essential thing you need in the ancient Near East is water. If you don't have water, you die, right? You're going to die. And so a city was built around a water source, and they had 3 water sources and one that came right through the city. And so it was their strength. But that strength became their weakness as the dam broke and it flooded, washed out a bunch of the wall, allowed for them to be decimated. And yet also at the same time, in all the confusion, there was a fire that burned a lot of the city as well. And they've discovered that in archaeological discovery. So you're like, whoa. I mean, not only does he predict ahead of time, but he predicts in this kind of strange way, fire and flood, that the city's going to be destroyed. And that's exactly what takes place. So Really quite amazing when you think about it. So what are we looking for in this book? Couple things. We're going to see, this is a really helpful book for seeing the character of God in chapter 1, specifically his wrath and his being an avenger. So that's key. You have the condemnation of the wicked. God judges his enemies. You have comfort, of course, that's obvious. We talked about that. And then really we have just a powerful testimony of the certainty of God's word. The certainty of God's word, that it will come to pass. Like we said, this prophecy is a near fulfillment that guarantees his future promises will come to pass. So, that's what we have here. Let's see. Here's what that new commentary that came out, edited by MacArthur. They've got a little quote here. It says, Nahum's prophecy serves both as an exhortation to evildoers never to presume on the Lord's patience, and also as an encouragement to God's people to rest in his love and care for them. By demonstrating the infallible nature of divine prophecy, Nahum's message provided hope to Israel and all God's people, reminding them that the Lord will keep his promises precisely as he has revealed them, both to preserve the righteous and punish the wicked. There's Nahum. Here's the outline we learned in seminary for ordination prep. Chapter 1, judgment on Nineveh declared. Chapter 2, judgment on Nineveh described. And chapter 3, judgment on Nineveh deserved. That was what we learned. So he declares it in chapter 1, it's coming. He describes it in detail in chapter 2, and then he shows why they deserve it in chapter 3. That's pretty good. I'm going to give us a kind of a five-fold outline. Just going to break it down a little bit more. And the first is the character of God in judgment. The character of God in judgment. And this is in verses 2 to 11. Verse 1 is kind of just the introduction. 2 to 11. And verses 2 to 8 are actually 2 to 8 is our first section. 2 to 8. Verses 2 to 8, though, are cast in the form of like a song, a hymn. And it's a song about God's vengeance. Wouldn't be very popular today, or maybe in any generation, I guess. Here's what Tremper Longman III writes in his commentary. He says, quote, "The victory is celebrated before the battle is actually waged. The victory of God against Nineveh is certain, so much so that the prophet could utter the victory shout years before the battle." And so that's what 2 to 8 is. And we have this amazing declaration of God's character. God is presented as the ultimate avenger. The ultimate avenger. Think of one of the biggest movie franchises of all time about superheroes, the Avengers. But here's the ultimate avenger, and that's the word that we're going to see used. Nahum shows really the importance of having a right view of God, a well-rounded view of God. Maybe the reason this book is avoided is because it just seems like too much judgment, right? People don't like that. And yet it is a comfort to God's people, his true people, that he will deal with all evil and wrongdoing. So obviously not a popular book for our culture, our day, but we have to remember and remind unbelievers too that God's judgment is an expression of his goodness. No one likes a wicked judge who won't do his job and punish evildoers and put them away, put the bad guys away. We don't like that. But somehow when it comes to God, because it has to do with us, because we're the wicked ones, we don't like this. So it's good for a judge to deal with lawbreakers. Now, in here, I found, all right, get ready for it, 10 descriptions of God's vengeance. So we're going to get like a little mini lesson here on God's vengeance and wrath, but I'm going to do it super fast. First, notice that God's vengeance is sure. It's sure. Verse 2. A jealous and avenging God is Yahweh. Yahweh is avenging and wrathful. Yahweh is avenging against his adversaries, and he keeps his anger for his enemies. Yahweh is slow to anger and great in power. And Yahweh will by no means leave the guilty unpunished. Avenging is repeated 3 times here. And notice that it's due to his jealousy. It is part of his character. This is who he is. He is jealous for what is right and true, his people. So it is sure, 3 times repeated. Notice also that it is severe. It is wrathful, it says in verse 2. It is intense. God's vengeance is also specific. It's against his adversaries, his enemies. We might say God's vengeance is slow. Yahweh is slow to anger. And this reminds us of God's patience in Jonah 4:2. Once again, we remember this comes 100 years after Jonah's prophecy. So God has been patient with them. We might say also that God's vengeance is strong. In verse 3, again, Yahweh is great in power. Yahweh's vengeance is also satisfying. It says, and Yahweh will by no means leave the guilty unpunished. In other words, no wrong will be ignored. We always want to see the movie wrap up and be, the bad guy. He gets it. They get the bad guy. He goes to jail, or they kill him or whatever. And that's what's satisfying here. God won't let anyone get away. That's what he promises. Deuteronomy 32 speaks of this. Verse 35, Romans 12, verse 19, and Hebrews 10, verse 30, that vengeance is mine, says the Lord, I will repay. And that's a great encouragement to us. We might say it like this, practically, we can forgive other people because we know God will be furious with his enemies. So either the person who sinned against us, their sin will be justly satisfied by the person and work of Jesus Christ, or they will bear the wrath of God. And so we can freely forgive because we know that it's not our place to judge. God will judge. And so there's a satisfying nature to God's vengeance. We also can say God's vengeance is sovereign in verses 3 to 5, kind of the end of 3 to 5. Notice how he controls the sky, the sea, and the land and uses them for judgment. The middle of verse 3, and whirlwind and storm is his way, and clouds are the dust beneath his feet. He rebukes the sea and makes it dry. He dries up all the rivers. Bashan and Carmel languish. Those are like really lush places. And so he's like, just turns it off, and turns the faucet off, and they just languish. The blossoms of Lebanon languish. Mountains quake because of him, and the hills melt. Indeed, the earth is upheaved by his presence, the world and all the inhabitants in it. And so God rules over all these areas. God's vengeance is also, we might say, unsurvivable in verse 6. Who can stand before his indignation? Who can endure the burning of his anger? His wrath is poured out like fire, and the rocks are torn down by him. So you can't survive this. And then we might say God's vengeance is securing. It's securing for God's people. Verse 7, Yahweh is good, a strong defense in the day of distress, and he knows those who take refuge in him. All right, so here's a silly and a serious illustration for this. The silly one is that this is the verse that's on the in and out double wrapper, okay? So verse 7, Yahweh is good, a strong defense in the day of distress, and he knows those who take refuge in him. That's a good verse. So they make you look it up. That's good. It'll feed your soul as you eat the burger. Feed your belly.
The problem is everybody eating the burger doesn't actually realize they also are in the place of judgment.
Yeah, right? Yeah.
Yes, we always assume, the Lord's here for me.
It's the one, it's one of the few, comforting verses, in a book full of judgment. If they just read one verse up or down, they're going to be like, what? Who's this God? Here's the serious illustration, though, from this verse. Andrew Bonner was meditating on this verse around the time that his wife of 17 years died in childbirth. And here's what he wrote after that. He said, how little did I know how I would need that half an hour later. And so he's meditating, the Lord's ministering to his heart from this verse, and then the Lord takes his wife, and he finds great comfort here. So there's a securing quality to God's vengeance, because God poured out his vengeance upon the Lord Jesus, upon the Messiah, so that we might be freed from his wrath, so that we might have a strong defense in the day of distress, and because we've taken refuge in him. So the last thing we might say, the 10th thing, is that God's vengeance is sudden. It's sudden. Now there's two things that actually show us this. Notice verse 8, but with an overflowing flood. Okay, what did we say? How did the city get destroyed? By flood, right? By water. By an overflowing flood, he will make a complete destruction of its place and will pursue his enemies into darkness. And so the flood pictures suddenness. And that's actually what we're going to see emphasized later in the book, that it's going to be a sudden destruction for them. It's just going to wipe them out. But also, there's another way that Nahum shows that God's vengeance is sudden. Hopefully your Bible shows this to you, but you probably see in verses 2 to 8, there's an acrostic in Hebrew: Aleph, Beit, Gimel, Dalet, or Gimel, He, Vav, Zayin, Chet, Tet, Yod, Kaf. Okay, so, but notice it doesn't complete it, right? The acrostic is cut off in the middle of the alphabet. Just like Nineveh is going to be cut off in the middle of their existence. That's how they're going to be. And so not only by the actual words that are used, like you're going to be cut off, like you're going to be with an overflowing flood, it'll make a complete destruction. That speaks of suddenness. But then it's like this is the moment in the acrostic where it stops, just like they're going to stop. So it's beautiful, like literarily, how he portrays this. So we're just enjoying Nahum more and more here. Hope I'm selling it to you well. Like I already said, judgment and mercy, or judgment and comfort, the messages of Nahum come together in the cross of Christ in a profound way, that we can be comforted by God because Jesus faced the judgment of God, right? So he experienced the avenging wrath of God that was due to us, so that we can experience the comfort of God and not be among his adversaries any longer. So there's a great connection there for us to the cross. So that's the first section. Comfort, or the character of God in judgment. Any comment there? Don't you love this? This is such a great...
I think in the Revelation, when the people are crying out to God, how long you're going to... I think he reminds them of the book of Nahum.
Yeah, right?
Probably.
Absolutely. How long, O Lord? And they're told to wait a little longer. And what a comfort this is. And just an assurance to us of this attribute of God, and just really working it out and showing that God is, he's the perfect God in all of his attributes. So we have the character of God here. And then we have the comfort and judgment. A comfort and judgment in verses, starting in verse 9 to 15. And really, this is the comfort of when God defeats the bad guys, when his enemies are dealt with. And so, first we have the comfort of God's power over his enemies in verses 8 to 13. And you can read that yourself. Basically, he's going to talk about the king of Nineveh and how he's going to bring him to destruction. Of course, this is going to happen in 612 BC. He talks about him as a vile counselor. And God's power is greater than Nineveh in punishment. Also, we see the comfort of promise in verse 14. Look there. This alludes back to the Abrahamic covenant and God promising Abraham a seed. But notice how he refers to them as a seed. Verse 14, and Yahweh has commanded concerning you, there will no longer be seed from your name, from the house of your gods. I will cut off graven image and molten image. I will prepare your grave, for you are contemptible. This is the outworking of that ancient promise in the Abrahamic covenant for Israel. Those who bless you, I will bless. Those who curse you, I will curse. And Assyria has certainly been in the cursing category. And so seeking to decimate the seed of Abraham. And so therefore their seed will be decimated, is the idea here. And so you've got this contrast between the two. So you might say it like this: touch Israel and you die. According to Genesis 12:3, he's the apple of God's eye. They are the apple of God's eye. And then we have the comfort of fulfilled prophecy in verse 15. And we already mentioned this verse. on the mountains, the feet of him who proclaims good news, who announces peace. And that's, like I said, a quote of Isaiah 52, verse 7. Isaiah 52, verse 7, if you want to look that up. It signals the feet are beautiful, not just because they got back from the spa or something, but because they bring good news. They bring good news. And in this case, it's good news of judgment of enemies, and specifically Nineveh. It signals for them freedom from slavery and oppression, and it signals salvation from the enemy. And like we said, the fact that God predicts with such precision the destruction of Nineveh, and he says it in the language of Isaiah in a future deliverance from their enemies, then it's an assurance to them that what God said in the future will come to pass because God gave a nearer prophecy that he fulfilled as well. Here's what MacArthur writes. The precise fulfillment of Nahum's predictions, near prophecies, confirmed that the Lord will keep every promise he has made, including his revelations about the end of the age, distant prophecies. And it goes on, it says, Nahum linked his prophecy with the words of Isaiah, Isaiah 52:7. Nahum's message of Nineveh's fall was the near prophecy that served as a guarantee for the distant prophecies of Isaiah and other prophets concerning the eschatological destruction of Israel's enemies and establishment of Messiah's earthly kingdom. So, we've made that connection already, but just some more confirmation. Okay, so then Paul is going to pick that up in Romans 10 as an illustration of the good news of the gospel coming, and the victory for Israel, and the defeat of their enemies. And so, we might apply this and think, okay, whose feet brought me the good news? Whose feet was it whose beautiful feet brought me the good news of freedom from my slavery, freedom from my sin? It's a good thought to recollect and think about, how did I come to hear the good news so where I could be liberated? And so, great thought for us. Well, what's the intended response that Nahum intends for them to have in light of this victory? Well, he says, celebrate your feasts, O Judah, pay your vows. In other words, worship God, worship him. This reminds me of Romans 12, verse 1. After 11 chapters of telling the Romans what God has done to save them and free them from slavery, here's the response. What do you do in light of that news? Chapter 12, verse 1. Therefore I exhort you, brothers, by the mercy of God, to present your bodies as a sacrifice, living, holy, and pleasing to God, which is your spiritual service of worship. Worship God. Offer your life as a sacrifice to him. So that's what he calls them to do. Their feasts, their vows. So worship him in light of his deliverance. That's a key verse in the book, 115. All right, that's our second little note there, second section. Any comments there or questions?
I was thinking about when in the first chapter when he says, let me see, I think it was close to 8. Verse 4, he rebukes the sea. Made me think about rebellious, chaotic. And the mountains made me think about proud and haughty. What is
Haughty?
Haughty.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then the verse 6, when he compares rocks, it just shows nobody will be able to stand. Nobody's strong enough. Yeah. Who could stand before this God, right? We're no match. Yeah.
That's a good question for everybody, isn't it? Like you talking about witnessing this morning or whatever.
Yeah.
If you led with that line, can you stand before God's hot indignation?
For a holy and righteous
Gold.
judge.
Yeah.
What did you say, Clay?
For a holy and righteous
Yes.
judge.
Right.
Yeah. That's like Isaiah. Yeah. Woe is me,
Right.
as he sees the Lord in his glory. Yeah. All right, part three here. Calamity of judgment. The calamity of judgment. This is chapter 2. And he describes their destruction here. And he does it in kind of a mocking way, in a kind of a satire type way. It's like God is saying, all right, Nineveh, do your best. Gather your troops up. Get ready for battle. And before he destroys them. Oh yeah, go on. Get your troops ready. That's kind of what he's doing to them. And so notice first the purposes God has for the destruction of Nineveh that are given up front here in verses 1 and 2. It's a dual purpose. It's punishment upon wicked Nineveh in verse 1 by Babylon. And then second, preservation of Israel through this in verse 2, giving them hope of their restoration. So verse 1, the one who scatters, that's Babylon. Babylon had a different policy when it came to taking nations. Theirs was different. Theirs was different from Assyria. It was different from Babylon. It was different from Medo-Persia and Greece. They all had kind of little different philosophies on what they would do with defeated foes. And like Persia, for instance, like Cyrus, he supports Israel going back to the land because they're like, hey, we want to help these people. We want them to be favorable. So yeah, we'll help them out. Whereas Babylon would take people away into exile. And so that's why he says, he who scatters, scatter you out in exile. Assyria often repopulate an area. They would bring peoples they conquered and kind of mix them. That's where you get the Samaritans from. They repopulate the north, and then the people who are left there, mingle with them. So that's, an indication here of the Babylonians. The one who scatters has come up against you, the you being Assyria. Guard the fortification, watch the road, strengthen your loins, instill your power with exceeding courage. So he's like kind of mocking them in a way. Hey, get ready for this battle. And then verse 2, it's an encouragement to Israel. For Yahweh will restore the majesty of Jacob like the majesty of Israel, even though those who empty them have emptied them to destruction and ruined their vine branches. So like we said, the book is a near prophecy that one of their enemies is going to be destroyed. It's going to comfort them that God will fulfill all of his future promises, including restoration that Isaiah talks about. And so the destruction of Nineveh will signal to them God's going to be faithful to all of his promises. And so it indicates their future hope. So there's the purposes in the destruction of Nineveh. And then he, in verses 3 to 5, describes the great Assyrian forces preparing for battle. And he verse 3, the shields of his mighty men are colored red. The valiant men are dressed in scarlet. The chariots are enveloped in flashing steel. When he is set up to march, and the cypress spears are brandished. The chariots race madly in the streets. They rush wildly in the squares. Their appearance is like torches. They dash to and fro like lightning flashes. He remembers his mighty ones. They stumble in their march. They hurry to her wall, and the mantelet is set up. And so they're doing all this furious, all this fury is going on. And then notice verse 6. The gates of the rivers are open and the palace is melted away. So notice the suddenness of this. Remember, like in chapter 1, it's like all of a sudden it's like whoosh, you're ended. And here again, it's just whoosh, you're ended. And there's a few words that get used in Hebrew that are onomatopoetic. An onomatopoetic word is like woof. It's like sounds like what it is. A buzz, Here, there are a number of words that are used in Hebrew that sound like water being poured out of a bottle. So one of them is like bug, 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 bug. That's the idea if you say the word fast. And that's what it sounds like when you dump the water, bug, 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 right? And so he uses a word like that. It's genius because that's how they're going to get destroyed. And so even in the sound, he's bringing that out in this. Let's see. There's and then another word is like it has like an M sound. Mug, 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 but same idea. And there's another one coming a little bit later. It's like buka, 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 like that kind of idea. So you can hear, different sounds that, depending, I guess, on how much water and volume of the glass or whatever, it's going to sound differently. But you've got these recurring terms that even show they elicit the sound that you're going to be hearing Nineveh as you're destroyed. So kind of a neat feature that's going on there. As I mentioned, their city was located at the convergence of these three rivers. And they saw it as their great pride. It helped them to water the gardens. You had the hanging, or different, not the hanging gardens of Babylon. That's in Babylon. But Sennacherib did have some magnificent gardens also that were watered by these rivers as well. But the city is melted away. The rivers are opened. There are the Assyrian and Babylonian records don't get into the fall, into this regard with the fall city, but there's a number of other sources outside the Bible that refer to the city. I'm just going to quote a little section here. The river being swollen by rains and very rapid in its current carried away a portion of the wall, and by this opening the besiegers gained an entrance. And so the walls are, the palace is melted away, the wall is opened up, and they are able to enter in. And then verse 7, they're exiled and plundered. So it stands fixed. She is exiled. She is carried away, and her maidservants are moaning like the sound of doves beating on their hearts. Now, here's another interesting word thing. Nahum's name means comfort. Jonah's name means dove. It means dove. And so here's a reference to Jonah in Nahum. Their moaning is like the sound of Jonah's, is the idea. It's the word for Jonah. So you've got these little callbacks, I guess you'd say. Here's what MacArthur writes in this commentary. He says, the Hebrew word for dove is the very name of the prophet Jonah. While God sent Jonah to Nineveh to give them comfort, Nahum, in Jonah 3:10, he later sent Nahum to condemn the city and cause them to mourn like doves, Jonah, Nahum 2:7. You just see these parallels through these two books as they play off each other. Verse 10, notice as well, she is emptied. She is emptied. This is another one of those onomatopoetic words. Yes, she is emptied out and eviscerated. So the people are taken out, they're plundered, their treasures are plundered and then wiped out. So they take spoil from them, they take their stuff. In verses 11 and 12, their leaders were known as pictured as lions, and then they have these young lions, which are like the future leaders of the nation. And basically he's just talking about how their future leaders are also going to be destroyed, wiped out. They won't have a future for their nation in that sense. And then verse 13, here's where that statement about burning comes up. Behold, I am against you, declares Yahweh of hosts, and I will burn up her chariots in smoke, and a sword will devour your young lions, and I will cut off your prey from the land, and no longer will the voice of your messengers be heard. You remember the messenger that came to Judah, the Rabshakeh, and he's like on the telling the people on the wall. They're like, "Hey, don't speak our language. Just talk to us. We don't want the people to hear this." And he's like, "You're going to eat your dung and drink your urine." And he's just scaring the people. And we've taken what you can't stand against us. And so now he's saying, "Hey, no more messengers. Your messengers aren't going out anymore. We're going to destroy you." So. Notice also this just sobering statement. I am against you. I am against you. Romans 8:31. If God is for us, who can be against us? Right? That's the opposite. That's a flip. No matter who is against you, if God is for you, it's inconsequential who's against you. But if God is against you, it doesn't matter how many people are for you. And so that's a terrifying prospect for them. It gets repeated in 3 verse 5 as well. Behold, I am against you. And so, quite amazing what we see in this. Here's a review of one commentator of all that takes place in the destruction. In 612 BC, the Babylonians and others, clothed in red, marched up the left bank of the Tigris River and surrounded Nineveh, just as Nahum said. The unusually hard rains that year caused the river to flood and wash away portions of the wall, allowing the enemy soldiers to enter the city through the breach, just as Nahum said. In 2 verse 6. The resultant bloodshed and looting were astronomical, just as Nahum said in chapter 2 verses 9 to 10. And though secular historians fail to report it, the destruction of Nineveh was by the hand of God, just as Nahum said in chapter 3 verses 6 to 7. So, incredibly cataclysmic judgment upon their city. And really, we might say a preview of God's actions at the end of history and judgment upon any other enemies of God. So that's the calamity of judgment. The calamity of judgment. And all right, any questions there? All right, if not, we'll hurry to the end, then we'll kind of open it up again. Here's now, where are we at? The cause of judgment. The cause of judgment. This is 3:1-7. And really, he's just going to give reasons for Nineveh's destruction. Verses 1-3 speak about her violence, and then verses 4-7 for her idolatry. Her violence and her idolatry. And I've got a quote here from Shalmaneser III, as he's talking about all the nations he slew. I'll spare you that. He was piling up skulls and, all kinds of stuff. Pretty vicious guy. That's how the Assyrians were. They tried to make people fearful of them by just extreme brutality. And so God's going to judge them for their bloodshed and their violence, 1-3. He's also going to judge them for their idolatry in 4-7. Verse 4 says, all because, so judgment's coming, all because of the many harlotries of the harlot, the charming one, the mistress of sorceries, who sells nations by her harlotries and families by her sorceries. Behold, I'm against you. So in other words, through their false religion, they seduced other nations into that as well. And so God will judge them for that. And he will put shame upon them to show how foolish their idolatry is. And then, verse 7, this is interesting. And it will be that all who see you will flee from you and say, Nineveh is devastated. Who will console her? Where will I seek comforters for you? So what does Nahum's name mean? Comfort. And this is the word for or a form of the word for Nahum. There's no Nahums for you. And so you just see these word plays kind of throughout the book. So that's what we see. No comforters. There's the cause of judgment. That's why God is going to judge them. And then we have finally the certainty of judgment. The certainty of judgment. And in 3 sections we see that. The first we could call familiar pictures. Familiar pictures in verses 8-10. Or verses, 8 to, it's probably more like 13, 8-13. And this is where he talks about the city of Nahum, or Thebes. So listen to what he says in verse 8. Are you better than Nahum? He's talking to Nineveh, which sits along the waters of the Nile, so their city in Egypt, with water surrounding her, just like Nineveh. Water, these 3 rivers, whose rampart was the sea, whose wall consisted of the sea. Ethiopia was her might, and Egypt too, without end. Put and Lubim were among her helpers. They had other helps, Assyria as well, they other allies. Yet she became an exile. She went into captivity. Also her infants were dashed to pieces at the head of every street. They cast lots for her honorable men, and all her great men were bound with fetters. So You guys remember this. You have pictures of this. This should be familiar for you because you did this. You guys did this. And he's going to describe what they're going to experience. You too will become drunk, verse 11. You will be hidden. You too will search for a strong defense from the enemy. All your fortifications are fig trees with ripe fruit. In other words, it's like tempting other nations to come and just take what you have. When shaken, they fall into the eater's mouth. That's what their enemies will do. Behold, your people are women in your midst. The gates of your land are open wide to your enemies. Fire consumes your gate bars. So you just see that the gates are open, and then fire consumes your gate bars. So there's just, once again, these allusions to how the city is going to be destroyed. So, like I said, this was a city, Nahum, or Thebes, in Egypt. Modern-day Luxor, and Assyria destroyed it. And so God is bringing this back up to their attention, saying, hey, remember that city? Remember it seemed like an impenetrable city? It seemed like, how could this city be defeated? And you guys defeated it? Well, that's you. You're going to be defeated, just like they were defeated. And this also, like I said, helps us to date the book, because we know when this city was destroyed, and helps us to see that Nahum really is prophesying. I found one commentator who said that no one really knew about this event until relatively recently, like 19th, 20th century, where they figured archaeological discoveries, they were more aware of the destruction of Thebes. So it's not like, Nahum had to have firsthand knowledge of this to be able to reference it in his letter. So it gives more confirmation of his prophecy and when he's writing. So these are the familiar pictures that he shows them. And then futile preparations in verses 14 to 17. He basically is saying, hey, try your best, but you're going down. And he uses now language from Joel about locusts. So he borrowed from Isaiah about the future eschatological deliverance of Israel. Now he's going to borrow from Joel chapter 2 and the future eschatological battle where the enemies of Israel are like locusts scattered abroad, and then all of a sudden God's just going to wipe them out. He's going to destroy them. Though they come up like locusts, God will defeat your enemies. And so that's really what he does here. And same purpose, just like in Isaiah. By using language of that future day to speak about a present time for them and how God's just going to wipe them out, it gives them assurance and encouragement that in that future day, he will come through just like he did in the past. So look at what he says in verse 14. Draw for yourself water for the siege. Strengthen your fortifications. Go into the clay and tread the mortar. Take hold of the brick mold. He's like, hey, you guys get ready for battle. There, fire will consume you. There's another reference to fire destroying the city. The sword will cut you down. It will consume you as a locust does. Multiply yourself like the creeping locust. Multiply yourself like the swarming locust. You have increased your traders more than the stars of heaven. The creeping locust strips and flies away. Your guardsmen are like the swarming locust. Your marshals are like the locust swarm, encamping in the stone walls on a cold day. The sun rises and they flee, and the palace where they are is not known. So it's just gone. You got this massive, get yourselves ready, and they've got just, massive amount, and then gone. And that's an encouragement for God's people that in the end, that's how the end will turn out as well. You'll have all these enemies that seem like these swarming locusts, and then God just goes, gone in his vengeance. Finally, you have this, I was really trying hard here for an FP, fatal praise is what I came up with. Fatal praise. Because there's praise of God's people at the defeat, and they're dead. Fatal. Okay, there you go. I tried. 18 and 19. Your shepherds are sleeping, O king of Assyria. Your mighty ones are lying down. Your people are scattered on the mountains, and there is no one to regather them. There is no relief for your breakdown. Your wound is incurable. All who hear the report about you will clap their hands over you. For on whom has not your evil passed continually? A couple things to note here. One, of course, they're being scattered about. The people just are, like sheep without a shepherd is the idea. And he even talks about their leaders as shepherds. And he's referencing Micah here, the language of Micah 1:9, Micah 2:12. And really, it's a contrast. Because Assyria, the enemy, they'll be scattered about. They'll have no one to guide them, no one to lead them, no shepherd. Their shepherds are sleeping, they're lying down. But in Micah, God, in the end, and he's looking to the future eschatological time, the Messiah will be like a shepherd, and he will gather his people, and he will shepherd them. The Messiah, as the greater David, will shepherd his people. So there's a contrast there in the language, very similar language. And then that clapping their hands over you, Psalm 47, 1-4, uses that same language of the time when Israel's king, their ultimate king, reigns over the nations. And so there's this joy, this victory. So it places it in that kind of end time as well. But notice how the book ends, okay? It ends with a question. For on whom has not your evil passed continually? And that's an interesting way to end. Cliffhanger. What other book ends with a question? Jonah. Yeah, Jonah ends with a question as well. And so these are both this is another parallel between the two. Here's what one writer put it. This rhetorical question at the end of Nahum corresponds to the rhetorical question at the end of Jonah, the only other biblical book that ends with a question. In Jonah, God asked if he should not have pity upon Nineveh. In Jonah 4, verse 11. In Nahum, God asked if people should not rejoice over the destruction of Nineveh. And so we see that parallel of the mercy and the judgment of God. What is it Paul says in Romans 11? Behold the kindness and the severity of God, right? There's those balancing ideas. And we understand God's character. God is simple. He is all that he has. There's the harmony between his attributes. We can't break God up into pieces and into parts. And all that God is all that he has, is the way to say it. And so there's a harmony there between his justice and his mercy. And we see that when we put the books of Jonah and Nahum together. We should rejoice that God is mercy and pities sinners, but also that he judges his enemies. And so that's what we see there. So there's the book of Nahum in a nutshell, I guess we would say. But let me go to Isaiah and just give us one last passage that's a great encouragement to us in the Messianic kingdom. And then we'll open up for any comment or question. In Isaiah 19, here's what we read in verses 23 to 25. And I just want you to remember, Nahum obviously includes discussion about Israel and Assyria, but also a reference to Egypt in the city of Nahum. And notice in this future day when the Messiah reigns over the world, it says in verse 23 of Isaiah 19, "In that day there will be a highway from Egypt to Assyria, and the Assyrians will come into Egypt, and the Egyptians into Assyria, and the Egyptians will worship with the Assyrians. In that day Israel will be the third party with Egypt and Assyria, a blessing in the midst of the earth, whom Yahweh of hosts has blessed, saying, Blessed is Egypt, my people, and Assyria, the work of my hands, and Israel, my inheritance." What a cool, I want to drive on that highway. Do you think it's like the Autobahn? You can drive however fast you want, But this highway that's going to allow commerce and trade and worship. And so all these different people groups who have been enemies, God has redeemed a people from each of them. And there will be worshipers representative in Egypt, Assyria, Israel, in this kingdom of the Messiah. And that'll be a great day. And it's Nahum that gives us the hope that all of this, including Isaiah 19, is going to happen exactly as God said, because he gave us an early prophecy that came about specifically to the details, flood and fire in 612 BC, so that they could know in the similar language, all of God's promises will come to pass. God's the God of prophecy, and he is precise in it to give us comfort. So there's the book of Nahum. All right, any comments or questions? Hope that was